Hello everybody, good day, and welcome to the opening of the workshop and conference with the title Update My City, Public Space, Smart Technologies and Urban Health. We are very happy and very honored to have you all here, and we are thrilled and excited for the following days that they are coming. Today, I will take you through all of the program. I will be your host, and now we will start by saying a few details on what is this activity about. The Update My City conference and workshops aims to generate ideas on the practical application of local smart city strategies to address urban planning challenges in the pandemic city. Specifically, it deals with the regeneration of public space with the use of new technologies, aiming at achieving urban health. In this context, participants will develop strategies for the better use and management of public space of Chania, of these cities where we are today. We will develop new and innovative scenarios for its future, and we are trying to reevaluate the usability and its flexible management. The event is divided in 3 parts, more or less. The first part, that has already started last week, it deals with the implementation of a methodology as coming from our partners that I will present you very shortly, which refers to the evaluation of public space in Chania. The second part deals with lectures. It has an educational outcome. It deals with all of the teaching part, lectures, polls, and feedback by our experts, by our guests here. And the third part deals with the actual workshop where you guys, participants, you are going to build an inventory strategy for Chania. We are very happy to have you all. Before I proceed, I would like to call our Vice Rector of the Technical University of Crete and our President of Kepedich-KAM, the Center of Mediterranean Architecture where we are hosted here, to give some greetings. And right afterwards, I will proceed to welcome our guests and to give you a little bit of the structure of the day. Thank you very much. Mr. Lagoudakis, Vice Rector of the Scientific, Administrative and Students Affairs at the Technical University of Crete. Thank you.
Good morning to all of you. It is a really great pleasure to be here and welcome all of you on behalf of the Technical University of Crete to the city of Chania and to the island of Crete. I hope you will enjoy your stay here and you will have a great time during this workshop. Our rector, Professor Evan Diamadopoulos, unfortunately was not able to be here due to other duties. So he asked me to be here and welcome you. My name is Mikhail Lagoudakis. As my colleague Valina mentioned, I'm currently the Vice Rector of Academic, Administrative and Student Affairs at the Technical University of Crete. For you who are not familiar with our university, I just wanted to let you know that the Technical University of Crete is a purely engineering school. We're very focused and we're kind of small for that region. We have 5 schools, all engineering schools. Just to name them in the order they started, we have the School of Production, Engineering and Management, the School of Mineral Resources Engineering, the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering, the School of Chemical and Environmental Engineering, and finally, the School of Architecture, which is also home of some of the wonderful speakers you will have the chance to listen to in the following days. We have about 6,000 undergraduate students and about 1,000 postgraduate students, I mean master's and PhD students. And on the other hand, the faculty members are not that many, 120 faculty members, about 100 people in the lab staff and about 130 of administrative staff. So we're a small university, however, we're very focused, as I said in the beginning, and we try to do well what we know to do. So we try to focus on excellence. Now, coming back to the wonderful workshop, which begins now, at least this part, I would like to say that it's a wonderful topic, update my city. So on the way here, I was thinking, we live in a time where when everything around us changes. There are so many changes we have to adapt every day. We have to update themselves in different ways. I was thinking every week or so, I have to update my PC. Every 2 days or so, I have to update my phone. And it seems that from now on, constantly we have to update our space, the space where we live. We even have to update our lives, in a sense. I mean, we have to adapt to changes. Maybe 2 years ago, nobody would ever thought about the situation we live now with a pandemic. Nevertheless, we found ways to proceed with our lives. Anyway, I'm not going to say anything more. I would like to wish you best luck with the workshop. I hope you enjoyed the stay, and I'm going to close this introduction and greeting with a video. It's a short 3-minute video about our university so that you have a better idea of what the Technical University of Crete is about and to experience the views of our campus and of the surrounding area. So once again, welcome and thank you for being here.
It's 5 schools, they really cooperate. It works very well. It operates very well. People want to excel in teaching, they want to excel in their research, they want their graduates to also excel.
To be in the front run of the achievements of worldwide research.
Innovation and education are our main advantages.
The kinds of things that we do very well. So the areas that we focus on, we're doing an excellent job in, and we've managed to really have a lot of impact, both research-wise and in terms of graduates. The head philosophy of the Technical University of Crete, I would say, is excellence. It's very important to be exposed to different cultures, different social events, different social attitudes.
They learn the collaboration in different environments and different types of scientists.
We have to take into account that other parts of the world have different priorities and different challenges. So we try to develop different aspects of energy technologies that could apply here and there also.
For local students, I think it's an invaluable experience to work with foreign students, work with foreign companies in the context of some of the big projects that we run here at the Technical University of Crete. We collaborate with the University of Houston and NASA. You can only understand the level of education you get when you are exposed to other institutions. Excellence is primarily measured by our graduates. The fact that we have graduates that are excelling, truly excelling abroad in companies and universities in the US and Europe.
I was amazed from what capabilities they have here.
It is challenging. It's very interesting, and I mean, I want to have my master's degree and say I worked for it.
They do a great job wherever they go. They are really good ambassadors of our institution.
Thank you very much for the wonderful introduction and greetings. And now I would like to call to the podium Mr. Giannakakis, the President of Center Mediterranean of Architecture of Kepedich KAM and Vice Mayor in the Cultural Affairs.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. Dear friends and distinguished guests, the Center for the Mediterranean Architecture, our cultural organization, and the municipality of Chania welcomes you to the Update My City conference and workshop. It's our great pleasure that we can finally have a physical presence at events like this, as the necessary protection measures are observed. Although technology has helped and continues to help maintain personal, social, and professional connections, the opportunity to meet, interact, and communicate closely remains a valuable gift for all. Especially for the Center for Mediterranean Architecture, it's a great honor to host this conference. With the cooperation of an active team of architects, whom I thank warmly, and the presence of leading organizations and researchers, it is possible to confirm our position as a center for recording, studying, and development for architecture and public space. For the municipality of Chania, the improvement of the public space remains in demand. We live in a city of many tales, in a city full of monuments, and we are called to design and create a modern urban future that converses with nature and history, but remains modern, functional, and sustainable. For these reasons, conferences and workshops like these are important tools in shaping modern city. We want to have active citizens. We want to improve our public space. We want to live in a smart city, and we want a better future. Please accept my best wishes for a successful conference, and I wish to thank everyone who worked hard to prepare and produce this event, especially Valina Geropanda, Penny Horafa, and our architectural committee. Welcome to Chania. Welcome to the Center for Mediterranean Architecture. Welcome to the Update My City conference and workshops. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the greetings. And now I would like to welcome our guests, our exceptional guests here today, and present them, and say a hi, and send our greetings also to the speakers that they are not here, but they will be presenting remotely. First of all, before I mention each one of them separately, please allow me to mention that this event is a co-organization among different partners. We have here the support of Kepedich KAM, of the Center Mediterranean of Architecture, of Technical University of Crete, and then we have here the United Nations program for the human settlements, Habitat, and we have here also the Global Pandemic Network representatives. Thank you very much for being here today, for making this happen for all of us together. I will start by presenting each one by the row that is inside the presentation as they are talking. So, Mrs. Cecilia Anderson, an urban planner, an urban and regional planner. She's leading the planning, finance, and economic section of the United Nations Human Settlements program. Thank you very much for being here. Mrs. Chiara Martinucci, she's an architect, also in urban planning, working for Her City project, and also from the United Nations Human Settlements Program, the Habitat. Then we have here the other co-organizers, the scientific coordinators, along with me, which is Mrs. Cristiana Lauri from the Global Pandemic Network, coordinator from the Global Pandemic Network, and also a professor in urban law in Italy. Thank you very much for being here with us. And we have also Gianluca Crispi, which is also from the United Nations United Nations Human Settlements Program, Habitat, a legal specialist, and we have been working very hardly with all of them, with the two of them, to make this happen in the last few months. Thank you very much. Thank you all. And we should pass to our first session, to the first task for today, which is me explain to you how all of the day will be developing. So today we will have 2 work sessions and we will have 3 lectures. We will start with Mrs. Cecilia Anderson in a few minutes, but before that, as an introduction, as a way to acquire common knowledge for all of us, we will proceed to the first poll. You might have seen, you might have noticed that in the platform, in your mobile, there is a button somewhere which it leads you to the first poll, the first question that you should vote. You should send our vote. What we are going to do is we are going to start with that. Then, and the curator of the event, Mrs. Penny Horafa, will give you all of the directions for that in very few minutes, in very shortly. And after that, we will have 2 lectures, introductory lectures, but also very essential for all of the work that has been done and all of the strategies that we need to set before we start our work. The coffee break will be immediately after the 2 lectures. It was supposed to be at 11:30. Since we get out a little bit of the time, it will be a little bit later. But that's why we are here. We are going to make strategies for making the city smarter and make it happen being always in time. It's among the strategies. Immediately afterwards, we will have the first work session. For the first work session, we will be divided in groups, in 3 groups, and it will be in the room just behind the scene. We will guide you, and we will stop for a lunch break. I pass the word to Mrs. Horafa for the first poll, and I wish you all good luck and good work.
Thank you, Mrs. Geropada. So now we're ready to run our first poll. As you all know, inside your Eventy application, you will find inside your Eventy application you will find the program of the day, and by clicking on the tab First Poll, you can start sending your votes. You are called to answer to the following question. What does it mean for you, healthy public space? A, green spaces. B, inclusive space. C, all day open accessible. We have a fourth choice also for the people who are here, are going to participate later to the work session, where you can add a word of your own. Anything else you can think of. So we will wait for you to vote. During this process, you can see the percentages, how the percentages are changing, and also on the right above corner, you can see the amount of people that is voting. We will wait a little bit because everyone needs some time to enter. Maybe some of you that are watching us via the YouTube channel haven't downloaded the application yet. So we will give a little bit more time to that. Up until now, I see 9 people that have voted here. We're waiting for the other votes too. The results of all these polls will be used later during the work session that is going to take place here. And we will inform you on how this will proceed, how this will go. Okay, we have 13 people by now. as we can see, as the percentage is changing, you can see that the order of the answers also change. For the moment, the 54% of you think that inclusive space is the meaning for a healthy public space, and 20% of you green spaces. I think we can give it like 3 or 2 minutes more for everybody else to send their votes, and we can go on with the process. Okay, I don't see more people voting. I don't know, I think we should give it like 1 or 2 minutes more and proceed. Still B seems to be the more preferable choice for you.
Join event. Ma io già ho join, sono registrata. Aspetta, fai così. Te l'ha aperta l'app? No, forse non è. Ma tu dall'app riesci? Questa cosa, facciamo lo spam. Vabbè, tu dall'app riesci. Apri l'app.
Okay, if you're ready, I think we can proceed. Mrs. Yeropana, I give the word to you.
Thank you, and we will see all of the results and the interpretation of them exactly in the work session, later in the work session. Now I would like to call to the podium Mrs. Cecilia Anderson. She will do a presentation with the title Reports, Citizens and the Pandemics, Public Space, Health, COVID. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And it's really a great pleasure to be here. And thank you very much for inviting us to actually join you for this session. I think it's actually really telling when you talk about update my city. And I think now is really the time to do that. We're sort of all grappling with the issues of COVID, and it's really that opportunity that we can take to sort of recalibrate our cities and how we take it forward. My name is Cecilia Anderson. I work with UN Habitat with the Planning, Finance and Economy section, and a real public space enthusiast. I really am so passionate about public space. So maybe should I try and see if the technology works? Yes. So today I was going to try and give you a little bit of an overview of the Global Public Space Program, a little bit delving into a report that UN Habitat recently wrote about cities and pandemics, but I'll only focus on one of the chapters, which is on the form and function of the city. In relation to that. Then I'll sort of talk a little bit about public space and urban health and how that has actually been impacting on our life. And then we launched actually last year some guidelines on how we can actually cope with COVID-19 and public space. So some principles around that for city and local governments. And then I'll talk about the importance of building a public space strategy. So with that, I'll just delve right into the Global Public Space Program. And as many of you already know, being architects and possibly planners, of some of those urbanization challenges that we're grappling with. A lot of it is about that urban sprawl which is taking place. We're also talking about local governments not being able to keep up with providing the services for the sprawling cities that we see are actually developing across the globe. And a lot of cities are also grappling with issues like pandemics and flooding. Recently now in Europe, we've seen how many of smaller cities in Germany, in Belgium, and in France have actually been working on, have been sort of impacted by the floods. And this is something that is recurring in a lot of the cities that we see across the globe. A lot of the cities are also grappling with not enough infrastructure, not enough public space, and also actually more segregative cities are growing up. So what we want to do is to actually move away from that business as usual, so move away from the urban sprawl of the city to a more connected city. And I think this is really what the cities in the Mediterranean are all about. It is that sort of connected, sort of more compact city. We want to move away from the segregation to more integrated and building social inclusion within our cities. And also moving away from the congestion to a more connected and walkable city. So UN Habitat has been working on public space for many years actually, but before it wasn't a specific program. It was actually integrated in different projects. So for example, when we were talking about urban safety, there was a component specifically on public space. When we were talking about slum upgrading, there was a component on public space. But then in 2012, member states from the UN actually decided through a resolution that UN Habitat should focus much more targetedly on public space. And I think this was actually quite an opportunity as well, because that also gave that building a network of partners that then could influence the Sustainable Development Goals. And there is a specific target which is around public space, which is really important for us. So as UN Habitat, we've been working in about 37 countries, in 72 cities, and we've actually upgraded about 105 public space initiatives, sort of small site-specific. But we've also actually been supporting cities in doing citywide public space assessments. As many of you know, when we're talking about public space, we need to look at it from different levels. So it's actually from the individual and how the individual actually feels about that space, and then to the neighborhood level, and all the way to the citywide level when we talk about that. So we really need to keep that in mind. It's not just a single public space, it's that whole network of public space in the city. We also worked for a very long time around the definition of public space and what public space should include. So for us, public space, we often say that about 50% of the built-up area should be dedicated to public space. I don't know what it is in Kenya. Does anybody have an idea? How much land is actually allocated to public space? You have a percentage? No? Okay. You know the number, but you don't know the amount of land. Yeah. Okay. Because I think a lot of the time we don't often think about that streets are our public space, that that's the first step that we take outside of the home into the public. So it's very important, and I actually see this here in Kenya, walking around. It's actually the street where people actually sit and socialize at night, for example, under a tree. We're also talking about open spaces. But open spaces are like plazas, playgrounds. It's not only the green open spaces, but it's also the plazas in the city. But we're also talking about public facilities that may be regulated by time, but they're really important for people, like public libraries, public sports facilities, market spaces, and similar. So, that's also included in our definition. When we talk about public space, we also talk about different approaches to public space. And I mean, this is not exhaustive. These are just sort of some ideas that we have from the public space program that we need to ensure when we talk about a public space. So we need to, like I was saying earlier, we need to have that city-wide approach, looking at public space from the perspective of connectivity, how it actually can support us in moving around the city. Another important aspect, which I think is really embraced in a lot of the cities around the Mediterranean and also in Kenya, is the human scale. So it's really about having that interaction between the buildings and the open space and having that human scale so you can actually feel that it's a place that you would like to spend time in. A lot of the cities don't actually understand the asset that they have in public space and how important it is from an economic perspective. There are lots of studies that have actually looked at property values around good quality public space increases quite a lot. So, I think cities really need to look and see about the value of public space and how it is an asset for your cities. It's also about earning a livelihood. A lot of people actually earn their livelihood from the public space. Especially in many of the developing countries that we work in, it's about earning a living, so selling goods on the streets, for example. But then you have to take into consideration the culture and context. So for example, if you're working in a Mediterranean country where the climate is actually good and you can spend a lot of time outside, you need to actually develop your public spaces to be able to do that. I come from a Nordic country up in the north. I come from Sweden, where actually temperatures don't often allow you to use public space in the same way all year round. But it's actually being able to adapt to the culture and the climate to make sure that you can actually make those spaces usable all year round. It's also about ensuring that those spaces are accessible, and I think you brought it up actually in the poll already about accessible public space, and it came out as the #1 in your poll. And making them inclusive so everybody can feel that they're welcome in those spaces. It doesn't matter where you come from, which walk of life, or what ability you have, but you should all be able to enjoy those spaces. It's about having that people-centered approach, actually understanding what the people's needs are. And I think that's where you can actually use some technology, actually, in understanding what the needs of the people are to be able to create those spaces that are really important for people. It's about creating those sustainable spaces from an environmental or ecological perspective. It's about making sure that those spaces are multifunctional, because you don't want spaces to only be used at a certain time. You want them to be used for over time and used for different things. So for example, we've seen a lot of projects where a parking space can be converted into a market on a Saturday when it's not being used as parking spaces. So I think it's just thinking a little bit differently about that multifunctionality of public space and how it can be used. It's about that social mix. Everybody should be welcome into a public space. It doesn't matter if you're poor or if you're rich, you have the same right to actually use that space. And it's about developing those co-benefits where everybody can work together to make those public spaces that important space that creates the city and that the identity of the city as well. For many, it is really the identity. It's not the houses that you might think of, it's actually those public spaces that you use when you visit the cities. So it's the identity of the city. So as UN Habitat, we actually work both from the site-specific but to the city-wide scale, but the entry points can be very different. It can be about entering through the issues of urban safety. So in some cities, they will reach out and they will say, we need to make our spaces safer for women and girls. So then that's your entry point, but then you can bring all the other aspects into it. It can be about environmental entry points. So it can be about green-blue networks, for example. So it's really about finding that entry point to be able to then talk about public space on a citywide level. So then we work from the site-specific to the citywide, and it's about creating, understanding, doing the assessment, understanding the spaces that you have, to developing a strategy, to monitoring that strategy, and then being able to engage communities in the management and maintenance of those strategies. So how do we work? So often when we enter into our collaboration with a city, it's about doing that assessment and on a citywide level, understanding the asset that the city has with regards to public space. And then from that, you can see where the gaps are. And those gaps will then influence the development of your public space strategy that the city will then be implementing. It's about also participation and finding those tools for participation. We actually found in the beginning when we started to work on public space, it was really difficult to engage with young people, for example. It was often men in the community that were very vocal about public space. So you had to find those tools to be able to then engage with different people. So we were actually using Minecraft. Do you all know Minecraft? Yeah? You're all young enough to know Minecraft, like my daughter. But it's all about actually finding those tools to be able to engage communities, engage certain communities that are often left out, to be able to then help in co-designing those spaces and be part of designing them. Then we actually support in the upgrading of certain spaces. So with design principles, for example, it can also be about the participatory approaches. So cities will have different needs that we actually can come in and support. And then it's all about capacity building, so being able to then support along the way. But most importantly, when you talk about public space, it's also about developing those networks. So it's the networks on the city level of different partners to come on board to create a good network of public space, up to the regional and the global level. So there are different levels of networking and bringing together partners. And one of the most important things which I'm actually really proud of is that UN Habitat was quite involved in the development of the SDGs. And there is a specific SDG on public space, which talks about, and I think this is important, it's about providing universal access by 2030 to public space for women, children, people with disabilities, and the elderly. And it's not only about green public space, although it says green, but it's about public space in general, but green space in particular. And I think this is also really important. So by 2030, there should be universal access. So you can actually hold your governments accountable for that. So with that, I'll sort of delve very quickly into the report on cities and pandemics, because we're all actually living in this period of pandemic at the moment. And I think we were actually seeing at some point that about 95 of the cases are in urban areas. So, it's really important for cities and local governments and urban areas to actually take the issue of the pandemic quite seriously. We're looking at 1.8 billion people that have inadequate housing across the globe, 2.4 billion without safe water and sanitation. And I think that is quite detrimental when you're talking about the pandemic. And we also realized, and this is our sister agency, UN Women, have actually noted that there has been an escalation of violence against women due to the pandemic, specifically because people are confined to the home. And I think that's something that we really need to take into consideration, is how we're actually dealing with that as well. And then, of course, it's been a reduction in livelihood opportunities for many of the people. People have been losing their jobs because of the pandemic. So the Cities and Pandemic Report, and I'm only going to talk about one chapter, or the recommendations coming out of one chapter, which is around, it's really about the spatial planning part. But there are 4 chapters, one about spatial planning, one about poverty and inequality, the other about the economy, and one about governance, with which Gianluca, I think, will actually delve into maybe tomorrow or the day after. But I think it's actually really important that we need to take that local level action, and that's one of the key messages from from the Citizen Pandemic Report. The other one is that we need to change our mindsets to move from an emergency mindset into a recovery mindset. So a recovery phase. And this is really an opportunity for cities and local governments, is actually to take that opportunity to actually change how we're actually dealing with our cities, to build resilience, both from an economic sense, but also actually from a health perspective. So some of the recommendations coming out, especially from the regional perspective, was about the importance of green-blue networks and ensuring that we have those networks for people to be able to enjoy, from a physical perspective, that use of space, because it's become so important now with the pandemic. The other one is about strict planning guidelines and prioritizing then air quality and public health in those planning guidelines. And another one is about strengthening the localized means of production. So it's about food production, but it's also about medical supplies. So being able to provide that support and the essential provisions that is needed at this time. Then on the city level, it was actually about identifying those weak spots. So what are the weak spots in the city? Usually it's probably a neighborhood where people are more poor or socially excluded or something like that, where you'll see that you'll have those weak spots. So you need to focus on those weak spots to build and invest in improving resilience and being able to then deal with the future shocks that will be coming. It's all about creating that compact, well-planned, mixed-use and dense city. I know a lot of people say density actually means that there's an increase in the COVID-19, but I think there's a lot of research that actually shows the opposite as well, that actually cities are being able to manage it also quite well. So it's not density doesn't really mean that there's good density as well. So we need to look at that. It's about promoting walkability, because nowadays people don't want to maybe rely on public transport to be able to take them around. So it's all about being able to provide that opportunity to walk around the city or cycle. And I see there's a lot of opportunity for that here in Kenya. Also, recommendations on the neighborhood level is around making sure that we have everything within a close reach. And maybe many of you have also heard about the 15-minute city. And I think lately people have also been talking, or cities have been talking about the 1-minute city. Stockholm, for example, is talking about the 1-minute city. And it's actually quite exciting about having that self-contained, where you have your residential, you have your work, you have school, you have all the commercial activities that you might, and also social activities, in a space of about 15 minutes walk. It's about actually developing neighborhood strategies to be able to deal with the pandemic as well. And in those neighborhood strategies is to make sure that you actually make accessibility and inclusion right at the core of your strategies. So taking that into consideration. One of the things that I think the pandemic has really shown is that public space is not equitably distributed across a city. And especially in many poor neighborhoods, you'll find less public space. So we need to ensure that there is equitable distribution across the city, so everybody has access to public space and can enjoy public space. And then, of course, with the equitably distributed, we also need to make sure that they're connected. So the streets connect with the plazas, with the green areas. So you have that walkable city, which is so important, especially from the perspective of being able to keep yourself safe. And then, of course, retrofitting some of the neighborhoods to be able to deal with these stresses and being able to ensure that we have mixed-use public space. So with that, I'll sort of delve very quickly into planning for healthy cities. And we've actually seen, and of course I'm a little bit biased, but of course that some of the undervalued areas when we're talking about the pandemic or urban health, it's actually public space. So of course, and of course I'm biased around that. But it's also about people's health. And I think this is important for cities to actually take into consideration, along with the economy and livelihoods and all these other areas. But for me, I think these are two really important aspects that are usually undervalued. So with the pandemic, we've actually seen that public space could actually lead the way in trying to be able to provide those solutions to create a safer environment for our communities, a healthier environment for our communities. And it's about adopting that intersectoral approach. Often we've seen that local governments, different departments in local governments will work and they'll have their work plan, but then often talking across the different departments is really something that is missing. And it's really important to have that sort of intersectoral, interdepartmental committees to be able to deal with public space. Because we're talking about social issues, we're talking about environmental issues, we're talking about health issues, we're talking about even the finances, actually. So I think it's really important to bring all of that together. And of course, you know, public space touches really on the determinants of health and well-being in our cities. And that sort of circular diagram is a little bit an illustration of that, of trying to show that from both the personal, the people perspective, all the way up to the community, to the economy, and to the city level. So when we're talking about public space, it's all about protecting from harm. And I think this is, there's a lovely example that came out of Vilnius in Lithuania about protecting from harm, where they actually opened up, in the pandemic, they opened up all the streets and the public spaces for restaurants to actually come out into that space to be able to provide that, first of all, the livelihood for the people that are actually in the restaurants and in that business, but also actually to provide that opportunity for people to come out and to meet in an open space. So it is actually working on those bylaws and regulations of the city to be able to allow for that. It's about promoting health. And I think this is where we're also talking about that well-connected, integrated system of public space, which takes into consideration the streets and how it's all connected, streets and open spaces and public facilities. And we've also been seeing that during the pandemic, a lot of cities have been focusing on actually expanding the pavements to allow for, so taking sort of a part of the street or the road network and expanding the pavements to allow for people to walk with that social or physical distancing which is required in a lot of cities. So Paris, Latin American cities, Bogota, and even I think Milan has also done quite a lot around that, expanding pavements but also the cycle lanes, which then of course also increases people's health. It's about providing services, and that's something that we've also seen. And as an example, I just wanted to give that markets have been providing a service, sort of municipal markets, local municipal markets. And it was really difficult to actually then allow people into the markets. It had to be recalibrated how the marketplaces were actually developed. But that also, because of the physical distancing, there was also an opportunity then to take over some of the streets, to be able to provide that opportunity for local vendors to be able to sell their wares on the street. So we've seen a lot of examples across the globe, from Indonesia to actually Kenya to Banjul. So there are different places where they've actually been experimenting a lot with expanding and allowing the different use of the streets. And then, of course, it's about maybe more long-term. It's about the ecological public health perspective. So it's about the environment. And a really good example of that is actually in Istanbul in Turkey. They developed an urban mobility strategy, but for the central part, which was really focusing on how to be able to move around the city. And how it was connected. So being able to then think from an environmental perspective how those green areas are connected, how the walking areas are connected to be able to have that more environmental, ecological impact. I just wanted to bring up an example that we've been doing together with the Inter-American Development Bank in Latin America, is an assessment of 3 cities, one in Santo Domingo, one in Monteria, and the other in Montevideo. And the idea was actually to, from the citywide assessment, also to look at it from a health perspective, because the pandemic came. And from that assessment, we were actually seeing that there are certain aspects that are coming out from these assessments that are really important to take into consideration. So it's about that there's not enough green networks or the green-blue networks to be able to then strengthen the sort of how people can move around in the city. There was also a real scarce amount of public space in the poor neighborhoods, while the rich areas actually had much more public space. It was also about in 1 in 3 spaces that were being taken over for sports facilities during the pandemic period. But it's also about the maintenance of those spaces, and I think that's something that a lot of cities often grapple with, is how do we maintain those spaces? And that came out very strongly in the assessments that we did. And of course, some of the environmental issues as well. So some of the recommendations coming out of that, which is going to feed into the strategies for those cities, is that we need to make sure that public space is seen as an asset in a time of crisis. It can be used for actually being able to set up quick stations where you do your vaccinations or you do your testing, but it's also actually being able to provide a service like health information, but also being able to provide those opportunities to wash your hands and similar, so sanitation points. It's about that system, integrated system of public space. It's about the flexible use of space, because in a pandemic, we need to also ensure that we change a little bit, that we need to be a little bit more flexible in how we use public space. So how can we do that as well? And it's about those public spaces becoming that point of sharing of information. Because often, a lot of things go on in social media, there's a lot of rumors around the pandemic, but being able to then give the right information, often from local government or the health facilities, and that can be where the public space actually comes in, to have that dialogue around the pandemic. Then there are also some of the recommendations coming more from the medium and the long term, which we were talking about earlier, the equitable distribution, being able to have that self-sufficient neighborhood, the 15-minute neighborhood or 1-minute neighborhood. It's about being responsive in the design as well of those spaces to be able to ensure that they are safe. And it's about building social resilience, because we are social people. We love to meet other people. So, we need to be able to provide those spaces, and that's where the public space comes in. I was going to talk about the COVID-19 guidelines, but I think I'll actually jump over it because it's a little bit of a repetition as well, and you can actually find it online. But I did want to go into citywide strategies and how important they are for a city, actually. We started to work with cities, and it started with individual spaces, but then we realized that cities actually are more interested in actually understanding how that whole network of public space actually comes together. So it's about supporting cities in that. So we went out and we tried to see what cities actually have strategies. So we did a sort of a scoping, a global scoping. And we picked out some of the strategies that we thought were really interesting. And of course, they have different entry points, like I was talking about earlier. So some of them are about the environment and making a park city, like London, for example. Or it's about health and mobility, so about NMT, promoting NMT, non-motorized transit. So the strategies all have different entry points, but they're also on different scales. Some of them are sort of regional, so it's the city and its connection with the region, but it's also actually about the city level, and sometimes it's even on a neighborhood level. Like we saw, the Istanbul is actually on a neighborhood level. It's in a heritage district. So, all the strategies are also different levels, and I think that's important to take into consideration. And then we started to develop a step-by-step guide for local governments on how to develop a strategy. Now, why is it important to develop a strategy? And I think I actually talked about this earlier. It's about cities understanding what an asset they have in their public spaces, and being able to then develop a framework or a strategy around that. It is also about protecting the spaces that exist, because we're seeing a lot of commercialization of public space. So, there's a need to protect, and what are the rules and the regulations around that. But it's also about the management of public space. And we're finding that, I remember I went to the city of Nairobi to ask them how many public spaces they managed. They told me 5 public spaces. And of course, they were only thinking about the big parks. They were not thinking about all the public spaces. So we actually helped the city to do a mapping of their spaces. And in the end, we actually mapped 4,500 spaces. Small, big. And of those spaces, you actually realize how important it is for a city to understand what spaces they have. Because they are just managing 5. Who manages all the other spaces? So it's all about developing those frameworks for that. And of course, it's about that equitable distribution and the provision of public space, especially in poor communities, where you'll see that there'll often be a deficit of public space. Your strategy is also a way of engaging different partners or stakeholders within the city and bringing them all to the table to actually have a discussion around how they can engage on public space, whether it's actually in the co-design or in the co-management, or there are different ways of actually engaging. And then, of course, the engagement of different institutions, so from the research institutions to actually associations of residents, for example, and things like that. So there's a whole spectrum of how to actually engage, and even with the private sector. How do you engage with the private sector around public space, both the creation but also the management, and setting up those rules and regulations, because local government needs to be in the forefront. They need to be leading that, because we're talking about the urban commons, and the urban commons is really what the local government actually manages. It's also about supporting the city in being able to understand where resources need to be allocated. Because sometimes, it might be around the protection or the management or the creation of public spaces, or even about the enjoyment. What are the different ways of actually setting up a program for people to enjoy those spaces? And I see there's a lot of really lovely examples here in Kenya on how the city is actually supporting and setting up concerts and similar to be able to bring people out into the public space, even though it is a pandemic, but it's really important for people to come out. And I think that's also part of that as well, allocating resources towards that. It's also about actually getting that political support. You need to have that political champion who will then drive that whole process of developing the strategy. It's about finding that synergy and increasing funding. We often find that there's always not so much funding for public space, but there'll be funding for building a road or something similar. So how can we actually think about how some of those resources can also be sort of plowed into public space? It's about setting up those regulations and institutions, and that's what the strategy is all about. Where is the strategy anchored? Whose responsibility it is to do different things? And then, of course, it's about the regulations. Because sometimes you need to actually adapt the rules and the regulations of the local government to be able to allow for certain things to happen around public space. And it's about creating that framework to engage with different stakeholders. Now, private sector is often quite difficult, I think, at times for local government to maybe engage with, but it's actually setting up those frameworks to be able to do that. And then, of course, taking that citywide perspective. So these are just some of the elements of why it is important to actually invest in developing a strategy around public space for the city. So some of my key reflections now, and maybe it's a little bit of a sort of bringing everything together, but not really. But we're in a pandemic, and I think now is the opportunity to sort of think a little bit differently of how we actually manage a city. What are the opportunities that we can actually pick out and support and focus on to be able to then make that change that we'd like to see. It's also about bringing everybody to the table. How can we bring people together, that communication part, but also documenting. And I think Kanya is actually a really good example of how the local government works together with the university. University can do research and similar around a certain aspect around public space, and then having that collaboration. I actually think that public space can be at the center of actually changing our cities. Maybe I'm very biased, and I'm very sorry about that. But I really do believe that public space can be that vehicle for changing how we actually manage, enjoy, and create our cities. And of course, that integrated approach and the well-being of all. And that's why I think this workshop is actually so important, because we're talking about updating my city. Is this an opportunity to update the strategy for the city, if the city has a strategy around public space? So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to be with you for the coming days and being able to work with you in coming up with some recommendations from this. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Anderson, for this interesting presentation. Now we will give around 5 to 10 minutes for some questions from our audience here, and also for the people who are watching us via our YouTube channel, you have the chance to ask some questions from there too. So is there any question here in the room for Mrs. Anderson? Okay, I don't see yet anything in the YouTube channel also. You will have the chance to talk about it later, of course, during your work session. Let me, thank you very much. Let me welcome again Mrs. Geropanda for her presentation.
When we are ready. Okay. Thank you very much. It was wonderful and also enlightening. And I will pass to the second phase of this day, to the second lecture of this day, that consists of two parts, of two speakers. It will be me leading the first very small part, an introduction to what we're doing, and then it will be Mrs. Chiara Martinuzzi that will take the lead and will take you through the work we have been already doing. Please allow me a few minutes before I start, just to give you the overview. The last 1 week, as I told you, we did a huge effort to gather information and data from the public spaces of Chania. This effort, which has been a collaborative work among our students, first of all, our participants here, our UN experts, and also the scientific coordinators, all of us together, each one contributed in making this happen. What is it about? It was about finding the correct platform through which we could gather data regarding the distribution of public spaces, the public spaces themselves in all the different districts of Chania. It hasn't been so easy. It has been very difficult, actually, because our participants, they had to go in 1 day and a half in 105 different places, and they had to work in small groups for 8 to 10 public spaces. So it has been a wonderful and huge effort on their behalf, and we thank them very much. So regarding to this work, there has been here, we are going to show here what is already been done and how we have illustrated the work. I will start now with this very small introductory in order to help all of you watching today the event to go through and understand what is this city around, about the context, and then I will pass the word to Mrs. Chiara Martinuzzi. So, as I mentioned to you before, we are in the city of Chania, we are in Crete. We are in an area which lies around 40 kilometers from the west end of Crete, and we are talking about a population of 811,000 people as calculated this year, 2021. We are having a population growth, small, slow population growth. It is estimated that around 2040s we will have around 130 to 285,000 people. So for a small medium size, for a big city, maybe this does not sound very exceptional. But however, for this size of cities, this scale, this is quite an important information. The area of the city of Chania is about 12.5 kilometers, and it is located in an area where the municipality consists of different, is surrounded by different municipalities, such as the one of Apokoronas, the one of Gavdos, the ones of Selinos, Kissamos, Platania, and Sfakion. Just to give you a few more information about the context, Chania is one of the 4 regional units of Crete. It covers the quarter of the west quarter of the island, the biggest part also, one of the biggest part of the island, and the capital is this city where we are. And the important information is that it has its border only with one more region, the one of Rethymnos. So these drawings that they were produced by our colleagues here during these days, they depict the effort that has been done in order to understand and read the city better. Just for your information, Chania consists of 26 different districts, and each different districts of them, they have their own public spaces, connected or not, meaning creating a network or not creating a network, and each one of them are very different with very different typologies. Here you can see a drawing that was made by our colleagues, and it shows not only the amount of public spaces distributed in the city, but the network that is connected them, among which several important land uses that they are affecting, they're impacting the use and the use actually of the of the public spaces. Another important information about our city is that when we talk about public space, what we talk about is we talk mainly about squares and courtyards, which is they can be found everywhere distributed in the different districts. We talk about parks. We have a large park and gardens. We talk about playgrounds. As you have noticed, maybe our guests, we have playgrounds. We have a lot of playgrounds. Almost every 5 minutes on foot, you can find a playground, an open space with a playground. We consider it a very baby-friendly, this city, very family-friendly for this reason. We have sport fields, and then there are a lot of parking lots, and there is a very quite exceptional division between the open spaces that they have a historical value, and the open spaces that they are used and they are part of a cultural heritage, but they don't make part of the protected areas of the city. So we have also a few pictures. However, Chiara is going to go through it, and she will show you much more in detail all of this information. For me, just to mention before I give her the word, is that above you have a plan from the GIS of Chania, of the municipality. They were very polite to offer us in our to use all of the shape files that they are having in their department of the municipality. And here you can see what you can see is the plan that shows how much of the urban grid is built, and the green is the public spaces, free public spaces. So that was for me. I give the word to Mrs. Chiara Martinucci. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulina. Thank you so much, Paulina. Hello everyone. I guess most of you already saw me somewhere during the training. I'm really happy to see you here again. And I mean, the intention of today is to show you a preliminary analysis of the data that have been gathered, but of course, with more time, more analysis can be done and we can understand different topics. Today we have focused mostly on management and urban facilities. But we can see that there are many other topics that we can look into if we had more time and more resources. Okay, can I see the presentation like this? Yes. Okay, so quickly, as Valina said, this is a map of the public spaces network in Chania. We also wanted to highlight the public facilities that could be related to, so also like markets and cultural facilities, to have an overview of what are the potential social and public areas of the city. These data have been extrapolated from the land use map of the city. However, we can see already that there are some public spaces that have not been included, and this probably depends on the public space definition of the city. So like, for instance, the promenade in the old town, like the old, I mean, you know very well that along the coast there is this huge promenade, and for us at UN Habitat is considered as a public space, but this has not been mapped. So here specifically we only have open public spaces. However, maybe in a second phase we should consider also like street as public spaces and take them in consideration, because it would increase a lot the amount of public spaces that are in the city. I didn't put the data in, but like quickly we had an estimated 0.25 square kilometer of surface of public spaces, which is 2% actually of the overall surface in Chania, which is very little. But again, as I said, there are many public spaces that has not been considered in this map, and maybe we could work together to see whether we can integrate those. They are among distributed within the 26 city district, but there are some city districts, especially in the south of the city, that don't have any public spaces, such as Pano Soda, Kato Soda. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly, sorry. So the Vlites, so those districts actually don't have any public spaces, which is also something that I mean, came out as a result of the analysis that should be taken in consideration. Just very quickly, the exercise that we did last week is part of the citywide public space assessment. Most of you probably had a training with Jose last week, and we will have another presentation this afternoon about it. But very quickly, the citywide public space assessment is a methodology that UN Habitat has developed to measure the quality of the public spaces at the city network, considering different aspects. So first of all, is about accessibility, so how the public spaces are accessible for the users, mostly in terms of walking and cycling. Then understanding the distribution, so where are the public spaces? Because considering the amount of areas that Chania has and the number of citizens of the city, we have an average of 2 square meters of public space in Chania available for each citizen. However, depending on where these public spaces are located in the city, probably like quite a good amount of population is not able to access it, because probably all the neighborhoods more in the south of the city, they don't have access to those areas because they are very far. So distribution is actually very important to make sure that the citizens also have access to public spaces and public life. Then again, network, to understand how those public spaces are connected between each other and how they are able to create a continuum within the city that allows movement and, again, public life that avoids like also unsafe areas, etc. Then assessing the quality of public spaces, as we said, it's also very important, and specifically we focus on access, use, so what are the users in the public space, where are the use that are currently in the public space, what are the amenities and the furnitures, what is their condition, are they enough for the demand of the public spaces and the citizens, what's the safety, and how is the green coverage and overall like the green component in the public space network. And then finally, it's also important establishing the quantity of public spaces, so understanding what is actually the quantity of public space surface in the city, because this is really important to monitor the SDGs 11.7 and understand what's the ratio between public spaces and citizens in the city. So in a way, in a nutshell, this is a bit what the citywide public space assessment aims to look at. And it does it through Kobo Toolbox, which is an open source online survey application that we can use to gather data participatorily, and then those data get analyzed through GIS softwares to actually really put those data into like, well, a shared but also localized like platform, so that people can really see and understand where are the gaps and where are the opportunities within the city. Very quickly, to do the citywide public space assessment, we usually run a training with the participants to explain them how to use Kobo Toolbox. We prepare a questionnaire with the main questions and the focus questions that we think are important for the priorities of the municipality. In this case, for Chania, we said we wanted to focus a little bit more on management, and we will show you some analysis that has been done about management and public facilities. And yes, so the first step is actually training the participant on how to use the Kobo Toolbox. Then once the participants are trained, they take the time to go on field and gather the data as you guys did. And then those data get analyzed by some GIS expert. The data gather has been done by 24 surveyors. I believe most of you are here. Which have been divided in 11 groups. And within a time frame of 2 days, you actually have been able to map 81 public space out of 105 public spaces, which is really, really good. And I really appreciate your effort and enthusiasm. And then finally, we have considered 78 public space valid. So let's say there may be some like technical bugs that sometimes occur, and so we decided to use only 78 public space for the following analysis. Very quickly, start digging into the data that we have identified. We see that when we talk about public space ownership and management, 73% of the public spaces that we have analyzed are governmentally owned, mostly by local government, but there are also some public spaces, specifically 10 public spaces that are run by, that are owned by regional government, and one that is owned by the national government. Then 2% of the public spaces are non-governmentally owned, so owned by private identities, and one by a local association. Then there were also other public spaces that had no information, and other ownership typologies, such as, for instance, I saw that there were 3 to 4 public spaces that were owned by the church and also maintained by the church. So this is quite interesting also to understand how the public space, like who owns this public space, who manages the public space, and who uses this public space. Because usually this is the entry points to understand how to improve and what's the target user of the strategy of the public spaces. Because if we don't know who are the people we need to talk to, it's difficult to create a strategy. Talking instead about the management, because sometimes it can be different. Maybe the government owns the public space, but hire like a private company or has an agreement with another entity to manage the public space. And we can see that 73% are governmentally managed, again, mostly local government. 7 public space are regional government, and 1 is national again. While 19% is jointly managed, so between private and public entities, which is quite interesting because most of the time public government has some difficulties in managing the overall public space, and creating partnership with the private could be very beneficial for the overall community finally. And then again, finally, 2% are non-governmentally owned, so between private and local association. And then the other potential entities that were not specified. Then something also very interesting is like understanding how many public spaces are formal and how many public spaces are informal. When we talk about formal and informal, we mean that what are the public spaces that are clearly planned and designed by the government or by any private entities that own and manage the public space, and what are the public spaces that are instead that have been more spontaneously developed. So it's clearly that maybe there is not really like a design of the public space. We see that 55 out of 78 public spaces have a clear design, so they have a series of facilities. You can see that the walking paths are clearly designed. There are some green areas, etc. So you can really see, for instance, these 2 pictures show you like how completely different could be. And also this, of course, impacts also like the citizens' finally use of the public space. And then again, very quickly, to have an understanding what are the public space typologies and use within those public spaces, we see that most of the typologies of public spaces are recreational areas, so a place for hang out for the community. There are squares. There is quite a high number of empty spaces, and this is quite interesting because it gives us a lot of space to work on. And then we see there's a lot of parking lot. I saw that also when you guys were doing the data gathering activities, you were also struggling understanding, okay, parking lot, what does it mean? Like, is it like designed to be parking lot or when the cars are there? Usually parking lots, we mean when it's designed to be a parking lot. And the fact that you see a lot of cars in an empty space that is not designed to be a parking lot, it means that there is like a mismatching in the demand and the offer, and also that a public space is like, let's say, is used in a different way and has a lot of potential to be also something else, to be like multifunctional, etc. Then there is like also nursery, green public spaces, sport field, community yard, playground, garden. So this is really like a very quick snapshot to understand what are the use currently in the public space. But again, as I said, I think we could integrate more analysis to have a better understanding of the current public space network. But this is going to be a second phase, probably. Okay, very quickly, these are some of the analyses that we have prepared. Talking about public space accessibility. So when we talk about accessible public space, for us we mean that public spaces are reachable through a 5 minutes walking distance. So for instance, you can see the red areas are the catchment areas of those public spaces. So you draw a radius of 400 meters, which is equivalent of 5 minutes walking. And you can see that clearly people walking 5 minutes, they will be able to reach always a public space. So almost the entire city is covered by public spaces, and citizens are able to reach public spaces within 5 minutes walking, which is really good, actually. It's a really good thing. It means that the public spaces are equally distributed. Of course, we see that there are some areas that are lacking in the southeast and in the north of the city. But again, most of the city is well covered. Also, sometimes we also identify the 10 minutes walking distance, which is the yellow area, which helps us to cover even more surface of the city. So eventually, the public space in Khanya are quite well distributed, and this is help us also to have an understanding where are the gaps, where should we like fit into. Then this is like a public space concentration map. You can see clearly where are the public space mostly located, also in terms of like quantity of surface, like surface. So you can see clearly that the Old Town and the Nea Khora, the center, a little bit of Dikastiria, those are like the areas that are well covered in terms of open public spaces. But again, as I said, there might be some open public spaces that have not been captured. For instance, the promenade in the coastal areas, and perhaps other points in the overall city. Then I would like to make a comparison between this map and the next one, because this one is the green public space concentration. So specifically, it extrapolates the areas that are green and public. And you can see that there is a little bit of difference between the two. So there are some areas that are not green public spaces, and perhaps this is something that can also be improved, especially considering the temperatures of the city during summer. So, like for instance, in Nea Khora, we see that there is a little bit less green public spaces, and also in the I think in Aleppo. Yeah. So again, this is a way to help you to understand where are the green public spaces and where are the gaps where we could fit into. And it's also quite nice when we talk about health and like inclusive public spaces that allow us also like perhaps vulnerable groups to join the public space, such as elderly that maybe need some shade, etc. Then we made a few analyses about the urban facility to understand what's the current situation about the urban facilities and where are the public spaces that has more challenges and the ones that instead are performing better. Here specifically we have made like an average to understand what are the urban facilities that are properly addressing the needs of the community. So red, let's say, is where the urban facility requires more improvement, and yellow is the less, let's say. And then there is still the black dots that have no information, or there is no facility at all in the public space, which is also something important. Here specifically we have included street lighting, waste bins, seating, bike racks, parking lots, artificial shade, fire emergency items, water taps, and drainage ditches. So those are like somehow the urban facility that we decided to analyze to have an overview. And again, here we can see that there are some urgency specifically in the city center and Dicastria. But then, yeah, there are also other dots that could be taken in consideration more thoroughly. Having a deep down inside those facilities and focusing specifically on your street lighting, we noticed that 75% of the public spaces have street lighting, and actually like within those 75%, 40%, more than 40% is considered regular, and 50% is considered good, which means that actually the street lighting system within the Chania is actually performing quite well. Of course, there are some areas that have still some issues, and we can see again that this cafeteria and the center probably are the more targeted areas. But in a way, in a nutshell, it helps you like already understanding that there are some also good practices happening in Chania. Also, same like deeping down into another urban facility about waste bins. Again, here we see the almost 72% of public spaces have waste bins. And again, also here, 36 out of 55 public spaces are considered good. So the condition of the waste bins are well maintained, but also they are sufficient for the demand, meaning in those facilities there is no uncollected garbage, etc., which is also a good indicator to understand how is the maintenance of the city doing? Like if the public administration should improve their maintenance plan or not. Talking about overall comfort and discomfort, we made an analysis about understanding what's the comfort of the public spaces, specifically focusing on bad smell, water conditions, and overall cleaning level of the public spaces. We see that only 8 public spaces present bad smell in the Chania city. 13 public spaces present dirty waters, and 23 public spaces present uncollected garbage, which again it's not a bad data actually, but there are like still space for improvement, of course. Deeping down in specifically on the uncollected garbage, we see that 30% of public spaces have presence of uncollected garbage. And this can be considered as moderate, bad, or extremely bad, depending on the quantity of garbage collected and if this disturb the actual user, like discourage actually the users of the public space. So yeah, again, here we can see that perhaps the areas that have more issues with uncollected garbage is the city center, while if we go back to the overall discomfort map, also perhaps the whole town has some challenges, especially when it comes to bad smell and water conditions. So yeah, this helps you also understanding where are the challenges when it comes to comfort and like user experience. I think this was the last analysis, yes. And again, then we took some time in these 2 days to also walk around by ourselves and have a look and understanding, and I think it would have been nicer to integrate some analysis about use and users in the public space, because it's actually, Chania is quite a vibrant city, I would say. There is quite a lot of activities happening, and the social life is quite active, and that's a plus that needs to be taken in consideration when we do this type of analysis. And so yeah, I think in the process we could add other analysis to also emphasize what are the plus of the public space network in Chania. But yeah, I think this workshop will help us also understanding new topics where we could focus on. I leave it here. I don't know if you have any questions. Yeah, I think. And
yes, if anyone has any question, please, now it's the time to ask Mrs. Martinucci. Thank you so much for the presentation. So, okay, give me a minute.
Thank you, Chiara, and thank you to all the students for the amazing work you've done in less than a week. Really impressive. I have 2 comments. One is the accounting of beaches as public spaces, which are a significant part of the urban land or urban life in the city. Beaches are, I believe, nationally owned, and in many instances are public, and often are privately managed by companies providing, sunbeds. So this is something that could be added, because I think it's key in an island, in a coastal city. And the other comment that came to my mind is the calculation of the 2 square meters per inhabitant. But in that calculation, you're only accounting for people residing in this city. But it's a city that I think can even double its population for the tourists. I don't have the official figures, maybe people in this room can help us with that. But touristic city has, other 100,000 people monthly coming, and they are competing for the same public spaces as citizens. So yeah. I think in a tourist city, we should also consider not only the inhabitants, but also the tourists to see if a public space network is adequate or not.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, as I said, some public spaces that will not be considered. I think we should work a little bit more with the municipality, because they are, I think they are working on developing a more thorough public space mapping. And I think it could be nice to create those synergies, but at the moment we use only the land use map, and that is not integrating components such as beaches or like the promenade on the waterfront and other areas that we actually do consider as very vibrant public spaces. So absolutely the beach should be also part of the mapping and the assessment, and probably would also create some interesting findings. And then the second comment was about yes. Yeah, absolutely. So the 2 square meter, where it's a really approximate figure that has been given, literally taking the surface of the open public spaces and the citizens of the city. But it's very true that we should consider also the fact that Chania it varies a lot between winter and summer, and we should accommodate public spaces for the maximum potential. So during the summer, and understanding what's the actual population, let's say during also when tourism comes. But yeah, also I think that figure could be improved while understanding where the population lives. Because usually we have population divided in districts, because maybe there are some districts that is very highly dense, and therefore maybe they need more public spaces rather than others. So also, depending on the data we have, we can improve that figure for sure. But that was just a way to kind of like have an understanding of how currently the city is performing.
Okay. Thank you. We also have a question from YouTube watcher, Mr. Joshua Thomas is asking, are you considering public space available in educational and institutional campus? It would be good to consider a carbon-free education campuses.
So campus, meaning education facilities?
Yes, the university.
I think in this case, we identify only the public spaces that were physically accessible, and we mapped, we have assessed only the ones that were physically accessible. Therefore, I don't think there were any public facility, education facility courtyard, but it's true that it could be interesting also as a strategy to open up the courtyards of the schools to integrate even more those public areas in the public realm. So yeah, absolutely something that could become a strategy.
Okay, if anyone else doesn't have any other questions from Mrs. Martinucci, we will... There
is just
okay, excuse me, Mr. Theodoridis, didn't see you.
Hi. First of all, I would like to thank you a lot for all this work that you have done in such a short period of time. Of course, the whole team, but also you for presenting the findings of this work. I guess the question is, if you had to prioritize out of these kind of negative points that we saw about certain public spaces, how would you prioritize kind of the things that you presented in a sequence from 1 maybe to 5?
It's quite an interesting question, actually, because I would say that I think it's important to understand what are the priorities of the municipality at the moment and try to work together with them instead of like taking the priorities from this analysis, also because these are really focusing on one topic, which is urban facilities, but probably there are other topics that we haven't identified, which is like perhaps safety or green coverage, that with the further analysis could show even more issues that are more prominent, let's say. At the moment, I mean, it's a very thorough analysis, so I wouldn't say like something in particular is specific. But talking with the Valina, I think there were like a lot of problems when it comes to smell and like this type of topics that maybe are things that actually people also feel as an urgency, and that's also something really important. But again, understanding, I think priorities also comes like you set priority together with the municipality and the users, not necessarily based on what are the most hard problems, so to say. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay.
Are we having any other questions? Nope. Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Mrs. Martinucci. We will take a short break now. Thank you all for being with us. And after our short coffee break, we'll proceed to our first work session. And we'll be back with our live streaming after the lunch break around 1500.